Hello, everyone. My name is Ulrike Meyer, as I was introduced, and I work and live and play on the Treaty 8 territory, the ancestral lands of the Beaver, Cree, Sato, Sikanee, and slavery peoples, and also acknowledge Métis Nation BC citizen, Inuit, and urban indigenous. I have been coming to the peace area in northeast BC in 1985 from Germany, and my husband had a farm out in the boonies, no running water, no electricity, and I thought it was heaven compared to Germany, which was quite polluted 40 years ago. And so I thought, oh, this is so pristine, so much bush, wilderness, and it's agriculture land here too. I have been working in Dawson Creek as a family physician in 1992 and raised my family of 3 children. I have now 2 grandchildren and 1 more on the way. So I'm quite happy to live here. And unfortunately, we have seen lots of changes in the last 22 years. I think it's important to know what fracking entails, which started here in 2004. And maybe we can start with the first slide just to explain the fracking process, what is all involved in hydraulic fracturing. So this is a busy slide, but it's pretty simplified. Normally, when you start fracking, it happens here, lots of agricultural land, but also on Crown's land. Crown's land is pretty easy to get a permit. To go on private farmland, they have to inform the farmer and negotiate a rent for the land used, and then if the farmer agrees, and many were opposing because all of a sudden you have part of your land taken and they build a road, or it's not great to farm that land from that aspect. Some have some say where it should happen. If they refuse to let anybody on the land, the neighbor will agree, because then money talks, which is not great for neighborhoods and community. The pad is decided on. There's a pad preparation phase where everything is cleared. There is wooden pallets laid out, so you have less impaction of the earth. And then once that is done, the fracking process will start. The trucking coming in for sand, silica, and chemicals, and if they're close to a river, they sometimes put lines out with pumps to pump the water they need. The gas produced or they try to get after is called methane, which is, I think, natural gas or oil from the ground. And so when they drill, they have the drilling rig up, and then they drill a hole several kilometers down into the rock. We are sitting here on the Montney Formation, which has huge amounts of methane gas, and they go probably down 2.5 kilometers. And then they will go in they call it the knee, and go horizontally or by 45 degrees several kilometers down where the fracking will happen. They use large amounts of water, sand, chemicals. Then in order to do the drilling and injecting under high pressure in the shale rock, your water, sand, silica, chemicals, you need lots of energy. And they have huge generators, mostly diesel powered, who will do this process. And then that fracturing of the rock is releasing the trapped methane gas, which flows back up a pipe and is subsequently collected and stored. In BC, the gas will be transported by pipeline to the coast and cooled, liquefied to minus 162 degrees in a processing facility and shipped around the world via tanker. So that's the whole line. For people living around fracking, you have 24/7 trucks, semi-trucks, transporting water, chemicals, sand, everything to the site, and then later on also bringing the wastewater, they're called, or produced water, which is now toxic wastewater because it's full of chemicals and it is radioactive too. Because we have occurring natural material in the ground and it's getting brought back up with the produced water. So the trucking is 24/7 for several weeks. You have light pollution. These sites are full light on floodlights 24/7. You have the noise, and then you have most likely also a stack with a flare. Then for residents, and the setbacks are really poor in BC. It's 100 meters from a house, waterway, road, or from any other building, except for schools that try to be away now by 1,000 meters. So it can be pretty close to your dwelling or where you live. And it's the workers working at the site, they do monitor for H2S gas. Because it depends if you have sour gas or sweet gas. Sour gas is more toxic, more H2S, which is really, it initially smells like foul eggs. And later on in higher concentration, you can't smell it anymore, and it can intoxicate people or cause death. So they do monitor at the well site the process and the levels of H2S. The fracking is now way faster than in the past. They need less people. In the past, they had a crew from 20 to 30 frackers, which is now 10 to 12 per frack site. And the pads are either 8, 16, 32, or 64 wells per pad. In Alberta, they have the mega pads that can be over 100 wells per pad. And when they frack, it's like there's zones. They call it, each zone they frack, there's a minimum of 100 zones, and in some formations, 200 zones. So they go backwards. At the end of my frack, that's a toe, they go and frack a zone, next zone, and they go backwards. So you have to multiply everything. The Oil and Gas Commission gives the water permits, and it's easy for them to get it. They used over 9 billion liters of fresh water in 2024. Unfortunately, it doesn't go back in your water cycle. It's taken out of the equation. If it comes back, it will be toxic components in your drinking water in 20 to 25 years. So water is a big topic. Produced water, as they call it, the wastewater gets re-injected, which can be 1,000-meter deep. Normally they do a casing. In the past it was just concrete in the old ones. Now it's concrete with a steel liner, which goes maybe down 600 meters. After that, it's free, the frack. So it's not encased. So if they tell you it's all controlled and safe, no. The casing normally goes down 600 meters and then down in the earth further, without. That is British Columbia. We are in the northeast by Fort St. John, Dawson Creek, and in the Montney Formation, and it's one of the largest reserves. And unfortunately, and the Liard Basin further up north to the Yukon border, and the Horn River Basin. In the Horn River Basin, First Nation were really protesting fracking because they needed way more water for each frack than in the Montney Formation. So each formation is a little bit different from the specifics, how deep they go, how water they need, right? And so it's a large area. And down south, if you look at the population distribution in BC, most people live in the lower third of BC. And the Northern Health Authority, which we are part of, is 2/3 of the province. And the northeast has approximately 95,000 people, which is not a big population dispersed on a large geographical area. And so there's not much protest here. And people who work for the industry sign non-disclosure agreements to be hired, 15 to 30 pages. So you can never talk about it, right? It's a financial ruin if you start talking about any insider information, because the oil company would take you to courts. You pay for their legal cost on your own legal costs. So it's financial suicide. There's also silence money given if there's a herd of cows keeling over because of H2S exposure, or there was a blowout. There can be technical difficulties, then there's money paid for the cows or any other animals. The culture of fracking, it's a hard job. It's well paid. You have some people making $240,000 a year. When you start, it's around 100 grand. So you have very young males making lots of money. And it's a culture, really masculine culture. And not much of the wealth is really staying in the communities. Many people who work also in oil and gas come from far away, from Victoria, Vancouver, they fly in. Any person who's higher up in the hierarchy in the oil and gas industry, they don't live here. They know. They come from Calgary or wherever they live. And we had also in our region outbreak of syphilis, which was quite shocking. And the trend was a bit all over BC, but as you have more sex trade workers coming in for the oil and gas workers too, also more drugs and illicit drugs trade because of the money flowing in communities, sexual assault, increased rates of gender-based violence is there too, substance use, and disrupted social cohesion and worsened mental health. As I mentioned before, increased divorce rate in oil and gas workers. Then they have to support their family, might have a new family, but they are like in a hamster wheel. They don't get out because they have to maintain the money flow. Gas and oil gas workers, they have a 7 times higher mortality rate than any other industry in the country. Normally construction is pretty high. They do have their explosions, they have their car accidents because they're overtired, but the exposure to the chemicals, that is explaining the 7 times higher rate. And as I said, they're prohibited from speaking publicly about the harms and sign their non-disclosure agreements. And long hours and remote work impact families.
Ulrike, there's a question in the chat which Mark Tipperman has answered partly, but one of the things they have said over and over to us in Nova Scotia, the tagline is, "It's not your grandfather's mine," or fracking. That there have been modern advances, and fracking is really much better than it used to be, because there was fracking here back in 2012, and a lot of protests and bad outcomes from that. And they're trying to tell us, well, it's all different now. And I would appreciate your opinion as to whether or not you've noticed any difference or improvements. I know fracking has been going on for very many years in BC.
I think it is faster and less people needed. That is it. And that instead of just concrete, they have a steel casing inside the concrete. But again, it's not for the whole fracking process. And I think the lines are smaller. Before it was a coil, but it was more control where that coil and the fracking process would go. Now they're smaller and they can have 2 lines going down parallel for 2 frackings parallel. And the person in the past was sitting straight over the fracking site in a casket, but that is not necessary anymore either. So it's safer for the worker, or that job was high paid. And I think it uses more water here than ever before. And in the long term, Gilles Wendling, he is hydrologist for Nanaimo. He did a water study for us, and he said when we formed our research team in 2019, he gave us a presentation and said, in the end, it will eventually come back to your surface water and groundwater, and people will wonder why they can't drink their water anymore in 20 to 25 years because it's toxic. But he said the aquifers sometimes move very slow, like 100 meters a year. So it takes a while to get up to the surface of the crust. So he said, but it was in his books, what he knows as a hydrologist, pretty sure that we would alternate to get toxic drinking water down the road where you might not be able to drink it anymore. And he presented to the regional district and to the city here. And it was a good water report. It was quite sobering. when we listen to it. The other thing is you have the air quality. I thought there would be monitoring of before and after, and there would be an environmental impact studies, but there's no need for it. There's no regulation, the setback of 100 meters. There's some air monitoring going out, but we had one study done by Elise Caron-Bedois, and she did the Experiva study, and it involved 86 pregnant women who she checked the hair, nail, and urine. And it was a follow-up of a pilot study with 30 pregnant women from 2016. The findings in the women were similar from her pilot study: elevated levels of barium, manganese, aluminum, and strontium in hair and nail. What was shocking for her when the 2016 results came out, the barium, and I had no clue. And I was really shocked. And she checked with Jill Svending, geologist, if that is, she should be shocked. And he confirmed, because barium is rock bound in the Montney Formation. And we find elevated levels in hair and nail of people living on top. So we are connected to everything what's happening down below. And the urine showed increased benzene metabolites of these pregnant women. In her follow-up study, the Experiva study, she also collected air samples in each household, 5 of them, and kitchen tap water. The air samples showed over 40 volatile organic compounds in over 50% of households, and 4 volatile organic compounds in the drinking water, kitchen tap water. And that was quite shocking too. And she compared to other Canadian households. So as a family physician, I have to go and mitigate risk in patients and say, I first take a history where they live, what their work entails, and that they have an air purifier with VOC filter for their bedrooms and good water filtration, just to mitigate the risk. So it is the water, the air. If you look at seismic activity, because they cannot deny it either, we have geology team from UBC came up, and they did a 2-part study here for seismic activity. Some people can feel it, cannot sleep, and we get earthquakes, and they're all caused by the fracking process. So that is something to consider too. And the geologists in the end, they said it's not if you get a large or big earthquake, it's only when and how do you protect your infrastructure. And they advised them to look at our airport, hospitals, bridges to go to between Dawson Creek and Fort John, and to protect the infrastructure. So we are in for a big quake. Here, they have to stop fracking when they have a 5.0 on the Richter scale earthquake triggered or seismic activity. In the UK, they stopped fracking at 0.5. So quite a different story. And then they will stop 24, 48 hours, and then they continue fracking. The companies using the most water will cause most of the seismic activity. So it's connected. And our new hospital will be opening in January, is only built to on the Richter scale to 4.0, which might be not enough for an important infrastructure. I think drought is our going back to water. Drought is a problem for us. We had 5 years of drought. Hay production was first half, then barely a quarter last year. Ranchers has to sell their cattle. Hay prices went really up. And so we have more wildfires, and it gets just accelerated with the fresh water use through the industry. So lots of effects on our environment, and it feeds our climate change, which is probably the white elephant in the room. It doesn't get addressed by politicians right now, really very much. And Canada goes full force for fossil fuels, which is quite interesting, the development. Again, I think you should look at LNG. What is the plan for Nova Scotia? Are they planning to have LNG ports on the East Coast to serve Europe and other markets, which is closer? And that might be just the first step to start with the fracking. And I'm not sure what your reserve is, what you are sitting on, how much methane gas is there where you are. In BC, the Wet'suwet'en Nation was really protesting, and it was radicalized. They protested that they would go through their nation with the pipelines. Men camps were erected, and they didn't want them on their nation. And there was no alternate route offered to them. And then they were really, it was almost like a war zone where the RCMP worked together with the pipeline company and intimidated people and then used harsh force to take protesters down, which was really sad. That was the Wet'suwet'en. This is one of the firekeepers from the Gigstan community. And they were really concerned for their health, living close to the pipelines and compressor station. They fear that, or they felt their nation rights is not heard, and there's no free, prior, and informed consent done with indigenous communities. And they faced lots of court cases of their leaders and heritage chiefs, and contamination of food and water sources used for medicine and food. Interesting aspect was also from Wet'suwet'en that once you get increased cancer rates in your population, that it will be passed down from generation to generation. So that is epigenetics, and they had a good grip on epigenetics. The 1% increase in the number of fracking wells leads to 5.9% increase in respiratory disease. I have people who before had asthma, maybe with exercise induced, and then they notice that the asthma gets worse and need more inhalers. And when they're out of the region, going to a conference or for holidays, they notice that their asthma is better. And they come home and have worsening symptoms. Some people present with chronic sinusitis, and they had seasonal sinusitis, then it's year-round. And when you take an environmental history, they might be close to a gas plant or other infrastructure. Our area has over 30,000 wells and 135,000 connected infrastructure. So it's just not just the well pads, you have all the other infrastructure in form of pipelines, compressor station, flare towers, gas processing plants, and the well pads. So lots of infrastructure with it. Even in our large geographical area, it's like a spider web. You're connected, and it's a cumulative effect, because alone when I go from my home location, I have 5 multi-well pads around me. And then I think Cape looked into when we cook with gas stoves, that you also increase the risk of children having asthma by 40%. And again, 1% increase in the number of fracking wells leads to 7.3% increase in cardiac disease, which is crazy. It's just, and I think that's where we as healthcare professionals come in to promote public health. And if something is jeopardizing the health of the public, that we can speak up and be strong advocates. And I think you as a group can start from where we are now at, not what we started at 10 years ago, so which is perfect, because you have all the tools and science behind it. We have also increased childhood cancer, but it's hard to nail down because of the small population. I had one 7-year-old with acute leukemia, and he's now a young teenager and done with his treatment. And his mom could rattle off 5 other kids with cancer, which is for a small community of 12,200 a bit much. And I think in Canada, it's 3 per 100,000 children incidence. So we do see more cancer, and we had no cancer report since 2011, and Northern Health Authority then recently released our cancer statistic for Northern Health Authority from 2011 to 2021. This 10-year period, the average age of the population is around 37.5 years. fairly young population compared to the rest of BC. Our incidence was lower for this population, but the standardized mortality rate was higher, meaning we have more people dying of cancer, and it's rising. It was, I think, 1.21 and moving up to 1.37. So that needs to be followed up, and we are looking into how we can get more concrete numbers. Our radiologist, Dr. Larsen, has been many years in the community, and he worked for 30 years in Cape Town. In the summer of 2024, he performed 25 lung biopsies in 2 months, and 23 were positive. Normally, he would perform 13 to 15 lung biopsies a year. So it was quite shocking. Another health flag for our area was glioblastoma. In 2018, the same radiologist said he diagnosed the 10th case of glioblastoma, which is the most malignant form of brain cancer. There's no cure, and normally people die in 18 to 24 months. And normally it hits between ages 45 to 75. Incidence is around 4 per 100,000. So again, if we look at the South Peace with a catchment area of 30,000, it's definitely too high. And we had young people with glioblastomas. There could be 28, 32, another 32-year-old, somewhere in the right age bracket. But it was really concerning. People who live near fracking sites die sooner. So your older population have 4.2% reduction in life expectancy and a 6.8% increase in their mortality rate. I did argue with my husband after the study came out, but he wanted to stay here, and I was ready to move away from here because I know all the facts. And unfortunately, he died suddenly and 4 years ago, and I'm still here, staying here. We have higher hospitalization rates for respiratory, cancer-related, cardiovascular, and other conditions. Again, small hospital to get the statistic is not so easy. But this is the outcomes from big studies. States did lots of epidemiology studies because they have bigger population living close to fracking. The fracking fluids, it's quite interesting. Each company has their own composition, and there can be 500 per 1,000 chemicals. We know that over 20 are carcinogenic and 26 possible carcinogenics. Normally they should be able to disclose each chemicals, but that's not happening because for proprietary reasons. And the cumulative effects over the years would be important to follow up too, and effects of abandoned sites. It's mind-boggling what you can inject there, and the workers handling the chemicals too, they know them as mixtures, and the mixtures can be quite different depending where you are fracking. Like in the northeast of BC, we have 3 to 4 mixtures used at the frack site, but these mixtures have multitude of chemicals. And if you go to Medicine Hat in Alberta, they have 17 to 19 mixtures, but a massive amount of chemicals. And then they have the acid, the friction reducer, and a super toxic mix. And who knows what is all in it. So there needs to be more transparency of the chemicals. And there is, from the states, Chang and Al, they looked at all the fracking fluids they could get their hands on, and then looked at the chemicals and where they came to the conclusion that carcinogenic, known over 25, I think it was, and some possible carcinogenics alone. Then you also should look at abandoned sites. We have lots of orphaned or abandoned wells. Who's responsible for it? It's a taxpayer. The other thing you should think about is radon gas. As you said, you have uranium mining. Uranium is then breaking down to radon. And in areas where fracking is happening, you have increased radon gas too. And for me, it happened 2.5 years ago. I have an air things monitor, and it showed bad air quality. And I said, what is it? And it was radon. It was elevated at my home. Then I had time to look into it, and there were studies done in the States where they actually followed it up, and they said, yes, the fracking does release more radon gas, through the fracking itself, then the returning produced water coming back up brings radon gas up, and the methane gas and produced gas brings radon up to the surface too. So 3 mechanisms that you have in fracked areas increase radon gas, which is then increasing your risk for lung cancer. And I would really pay attention where the fracking is and how much uranium is in your ground, right? Because that is normally not much discussed, the radon gas exposure.
Do you want to say anything about the flaring as well?
Yeah, the flaring is... normally there's technology where you can avoid flaring, and you could look into it if they plan not to flare at all. There is filter technology for over 20 years. They could do it here too, but for the industry, it's additional cost, and it's cheaper to flare, right? Just to let it out into the air. But technology is there to prevent flaring. And but here in Canada, flaring is allowed. There was around 2012, our MLA was saying, "Oh, there's no more flaring." I was really happy to hear it, but when I approached him, he said, "Oh, no, it's just they can't flare more than 24 hours, so they stop and restart. But they're flaring more than 24 hours. There's nothing. They can flare." And the flare mix, you have. The dirty gas, they want to avoid explosions or pressure control too, but you have all your volatile organic compounds in it, your toluene, benzene, formaldehyde, and that has effects on the health of people living close by. So then it can give eye, nose, throat irritation, respiratory problems like cough, worsening asthma, difficulty breathing, then cardiovascular problems like blood pressure, heart attacks, worsening heart disease, the brain and central nervous system with headaches, lightheadedness, damage to blood and bone marrow, causing anemia and immunological problems, and reproductive system effects on fetal and child development, cancer, and premature mortality. So, and that is quite well reported. We did a summary when we formed the research team in 2019. The first project was to look at all existing studies on fracking and health consequences. And there were over 1,000 studies, actually, and they came all out after more or less 2014. And 52 we narrowed it down to, and then summarized the health effect. And that was also, Kathy, I sent you the National Observer article, the opinion piece where everything is inside. So living near fracking site, increase of complication of pregnancy. I mentioned that adverse pregnancy outcomes with preterm birth, lower birth weight, birth defects. And Elise Caron-Baudoin, who did the pregnant women study, also did a study and looked at 6,000 birth outcomes in Fort St. John Hospital. She mapped these women by their postal code and what is happening in their neighborhood in terms of frack sites, well sites, and what stage they were. Where they're fracking, where they're producing, and then lined this up with her findings from the birth outcomes, and she could see in 2.55 and 10 kilometer radius that there was an effect on lower birth weight and premature birth. In Dawson Creek, we had a group of physicians leaving. And when Elise's work came out in the pregnant women study, some were concerned. And we had one internist, and he had a young family. He stayed probably 5 years, and he was part of this group of physicians. And he diagnosed 3 rare cancers. And he said their incidence is 1 in 500,000. And he found them in really location, like the sinuses or nose. And for him, the book was closed here and he moved away. And then one of the colleagues had one daughter and she had a brain tumor and needed treatment down south. So they moved away. So the stability of the community is for physician population not that great.
There's a question in the chat, Ulrike, about given the severity of the health risks, are you aware of communities that have successfully fought against fracking in Canada or elsewhere?
I think elsewhere I would look, like Scotland was given the opportunity to look for themselves if they wanted fracking, because the UK went ahead twice and it's now banned. But Scotland did a 360-degree review of fracking. What would it have an effect for the country's GDP? They looked at tourism, because the old mining areas, which was now for tourists, would be the fracking areas. Then they looked at health, social disruption, housing, prices, contamination of their soil, their water, their air. They looked at every aspect. And the conclusion was there would be a 0.5% increase in their GDP. And they said, no, thank you. We're not going for it. That was Scotland. Norway is really resource rich for oil and gas. They do conventional oil and gas production, which happened here in this region in the past too. Single well going down, gas well, and you produce. Same with the pump jacks for oil. Not much impact. And so that's what they do on the land. And they looked at fracking. But they had from Oslo a company who were really well versed in water wells internationally. And they did look through the whole shale formation in Norway and did probed, went down, looked where was the fresh water, where was the aquifers, how would it disturb? Their conclusion was they could give no guarantee for future water safety. So the book was closed for Norway, but as far as I know, they do offshore fracking. They're the richest country because all the profits from oil and gas go in a national fund and not by private companies. And they were able to electrify their country and propel that, which is quite an oxymoron. All the fossil fuels profits go in electrification. Nevertheless, they only use maybe 6 to 8% of gas and oil for their own country. That would be quite interesting too. But most European countries have different environmental laws, way stricter. So that's why the UK had, for instance, the hold on fracking when there was the seismic activity on 0.5 on the Richter scale. And here it's 5.0. And so it's quite a different game. Here it's pretty lax with environmental oversight and regulation. So I think Europe would be the place to look at where it was successful to ban fracking. And many countries did after they looked at the evidence. Yeah. So yeah, it is devastatingly clear how harmful fracking is for people's health in this province and anywhere else. And these are real families, real communities. Fracking for natural gas must end in British Columbia. And we wanted an independent health assessment done. It's interesting, like you never know what causes which ripple effect. We did a presentation for 10 minutes to the City Council in Dawson Creek. Margaret McGregor, Tim Takaro, and myself, and Elise Caron-Boudoir. And not Tim, it was just Elise, Margaret, and myself. And just 10 minutes we had to present our concerns with fracking and the health in our region. And there was half an hour for question and answer they used, which was quite amazing. And we presented also the letter of the Council of Health Officer of BC, who requesting an independent health assessment in this region and in Kitimat. And 2 weeks later, the city of Dawson Creek passed a motion that they support the Health Officers Council request, which is quite amazing. Meanwhile, Hazelton and Kitimat, Hazelton and Terrace have followed in the northwest, as has Squamish near Vancouver.
Yeah. Jim, I see you have your hand up. Over to you.
Well, I see someone has put it in the chat already, but here in New Brunswick, we use to great effect the compendium, and it's comprehensive. It's got every study and every newspaper article and every journalistic investigation into it. So it's an invaluable resource.
Yes, that will be very valuable.
And if I can say something while I'm here, just because it came up
Please.
a second ago, was about the chemicals in the in the water. And as if I recall my statistics correctly, there are roughly 1,000 different chemicals from which they can choose and as Dr. Meyer said, everyone's different, and they were all totally secret. The biggest problem that back in 2014 that the Council of Canadian Academies, which did a big review of fracking, their main big problem was the fact they said, and this is, I think, really important, is that not only do we know these chemicals, only about a third of them or less had ever been tested for any kind of health effect, generally just if they were carcinogenic or not. None had been tested in concert with each other. Nobody knew how that would react when you connected them with the chemicals that are already in the earth, all the heavy metals and everything that are in there. And then take it another step is that with all the pressure and heat, plus those other chemicals, plus we don't know what ones are in there. It was like, this is just a total insanity. There's no way of knowing what we're doing to ourselves or the earth or anything else. And so they started this frac focus system where each company was supposed to report the chemicals that they used. Well, it turned out to be a joke. It's been audited numbers of times, and it's voluntary to begin with. Nobody checks it. It's way out of date. A lot of people found were lying and just weren't saying what's in it. So it's totally useless. So now, years and years later, with all these quote improvements in fracking and everything, we're exactly where we were in 2008. Is that we don't know anything about what these guys are putting into the ground.
Right. And someone, when I was at the public information session, I asked the lead for the project. I said, "Well, what about contamination of water?" And he said, "Well, the drill goes way below the aquifer, so the aquifer won't be affected." But from what you've told us, Ulrike, that's completely false. Is that wherever the fracking occurs, eventually the fluid works itself into the aquifers.
Yeah.
Well, we had Dr. John Cherry, who was the world's foremost hydrologist back in 2014. We were going through our moratorium quest. And at that point, nobody had actually done a study where you actually traced where things went for many reasons, logistical reasons and all like that. But anyway, subsequent to his testifying, and he was a really important witness for us at the moratorium hearings, but subsequent to that, his group turned out to be the only group in Canada who actually created a study where they were able to, put markers. Now they just tested for methane and not for all the chemicals, but where they showed where over time this methane did not stay where they put it. It migrated up through the aquifer into the surface water, and so sort of put to rest that argument that, oh, well, we put it down there so deep that it's not going to go anywhere,
Thank you, Jim. Barb, you have your hand up. Do you want to? Sorry, I should have asked people to introduce themselves when they're speaking. Oh. But
I'm Jim Emberger. I'm a spokesperson for the New Brunswick Anti-Shale Gas Alliance.
Okay, thank you.
Barb Harris, and like Jim, I've worked on this since 2010 or whatever. I'm in Nova Scotia. I work with NOFAC. I just wanted to throw in a couple of things. One is that at the so-called public consultations that Dalhousie was organized on behalf of the provincial government, The misinformation is just astounding, and the fact that you gave us, Ulrike, about the steel casing only going down 600 feet, again contradicts what they're saying. Oh, it's all different because now there's casing, but they just kind of forget the critical parts, like it only goes down so far.
600 meters, so it would be 1,800 feet.
Yeah,
sort of.
The other thing that I think some of us know, in Eastern Canada, certainly in Nova Scotia, is that the geology is so different that the risk of contamination of aquifers is even greater than in other places, because we have very uneven, wavy layers of geology, and so the potential for fissures and cracks to allow either fracking fluids or methane to infiltrate and move for great distances is apparently, I am not a geologist, but this is what geologists told us last time around, that the risks here are even greater. And that was one of the reasons that John Cherry said that especially in Eastern Canada, where it hadn't begun, it should never be started, or it should not start. He didn't say never. I don't think. So a lot of this, yeah. So what you're saying is helping us with some pieces of information that are being actively circulated that are incorrect. And if I can add one more thing, sorry, it's just last time around, we had to it was the health aspect of fracking. It wasn't even really understood as important, even by people who were very committed to being against fracking. And it's such a relief now. In a bad way, I guess it's a relief, but that CAPE is really on this and putting your expertise, and the information gathering is, as you said, so much more advanced. We have so much more information than we did in 2014. So I'm so grateful to CAPE, people across the country, for throwing your energy on this piece of the puzzle.